Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Severance Season 2, Episode 7. It's called Chikhai Bardo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I have no idea if I am. But spoilers for the episode, as always. This was a big one, and this is almost one, not that we knew the contents of it, because there's a lot of things in here that is very revealing about stuff that's going on with Gemma. But just the idea that we were going to eventually get a Gemma-focused episode where we get to learn a lot more about who she was and learn more about what's going on with her in Lumen, we knew that something like this was coming, and it was always going to feel like a special episode. It's kind of like last episode I went on a little, not a rant, it was a positive thing, but I went on a little discussion about how Helly coming into the restaurant when they're both outies felt like a big deal because it's a TV show and we've spent a season and a half until they did that. We have spent so long building to learning more about Gemma ever since finding out that that's who Miss Casey is. And the opening of this episode knew that we were anticipating that. It intentionally has the camera behind her as she's walking, so we all have a few seconds to think, wait, who are we looking at right now? This is different. And I think most audience members, I certainly did, but I think most people will realize who it's going to be before it shows you the face. And you realize, oh, this is going to be special, this is different, this is going to be, like, while the episode in the mountains was a little bit more divisive and I didn't love all of it, this is the type of episode that feels like different and stands out, but completely hits every single beat that it needs to. And it felt like it raised the stakes, which is probably the biggest compliment I can give it, is that the idea of getting to Gemma now feels like something that we need as the audience, that like the situation she's in is actually really dark, right? It's beyond just, oh, they've tricked her and they're doing some experiments or something. It feels worse than that now that we have some context. It feels so inhumane that, you know, we'll dive into all that, obviously. It's probably the first thing we'll dive into. But it was an excellent episode. If that's not clear by my tone, then, you know, it fleshes out who Gemma and Mark were before the start of the show, what their relationship was like, the troubles they had. Obviously, it adds a lot to the mysteries and what's going on with Gemma inside Lumen, and answers some pretty notable. I mean, there's a lot of new mysteries, don't get me wrong, but it answers a specific thing that there was a lot of theorizing going on. At the very least, I was doing a lot of theorizing about what Gemma actually is now. Like, I literally was theorizing that she was really dead and that she was just an innie now. That seems to not be the case. The real Gemma is in there, and the question of, like, was she ever even in an accident is coming up. I mean, one of the things that I think most people will notice is that when they go to the clinic and the flashbacks, we see the doctor from Lumen at the clinic, which maybe suggests that they targeted her because of something in her blood or something, you know, especially since the episode even starts with Mark and her meeting whilst they're donating blood. It's like a running theme throughout the episode that there's something in her that made them think she's a candidate for whatever it is they're doing with her. So I think all these details are super exciting. From a filmmaking point of view, this episode looked and felt super different, intentionally so. I don't know if they actually shot it on film. That would maybe be a bit of a pivot if they did. But at the very least, they added effects to make it look more like film. There's little specks and stuff. Not the whole episode, just the flashbacks with Gemma and Mark and their relationship. And it feels warmer. And part of that is just because some of the scenes take place in not a snow-covered town, which is what the entire show has been up until this point. So it almost feels like a different world. I think that the scene I noticed it the most, probably, was when Devin and Rickon were over and they were having dinner. It was seeing these other characters, all of a sudden I realised how different they all looked. And like a sunny day, and it just the entire vibe was different. The shooting style felt different. There was a lot more handheld in the camera. Just simple things like that just gave everything a very different feel. So even just on that artistic level, they went out their way to make this feel very different. And the idea, of course, is that Mark is remembering a lot of these things whilst he's unconscious. And like Devon's there arguing with Regabi about what to do, and like that's a whole other part of the episode. It's probably the smallest part of the episode, but it's definitely there as a framing device for everything else that's going on. So where do I start? Really, I mean the flashback story. It's sweet to begin with. We see their chemistry, and it's funny that we got Mark meeting Helena outside in the world last episode, and how there was quickly a little bit of chemistry and some sarcastic jokes flying back and forth, because it actually is kind of how him and Gemma met. There's some jokes back and forth because he's grading a paper and they're making little digs about it, but they hit it off. It's a nice scene, and we see some of their happy moments afterwards and kind of like further down the line. And then ultimately the idea that they're expecting a kid, that he's bought a crib to build. And that moment with Devon at the dinner where she's not drinking and Devon realizes, I think Devon saying, get the F out under her breath as a reaction to realizing that his brother is going to be a father. Her brother's going to be a father, sorry. Just like it hit really hard because it felt so Devon to swear like that. But then, of course, from there, it's kind of tragic, and it's this kind of recurring thing. There's a really powerful scene where, it seems to be the moment she's realized that she's probably losing the baby. Maybe hasn't, confirmed it yet, hasn't went to a doctor yet, but there's, she feels great pain. There's blood running down her leg, and she cries in the shower, and it's really powerful. Mark finds her, and it's a whole big thing. And then we get the scene at the clinic and all the rest of it. And notably, like I said, we see the evil doctor dude from Lumen, who we've, because we're flashing backwards and forwards, we've already seen him in the episode by this point. So he is there to notice. You can tell that there's something going on here with that. And then they try for a baby. Again, honestly, not only do I think they targeted Gemma based on whatever material they got from her when they tested on her at the clinic, it wouldn't surprise me if the reason why they still couldn't conceive after this is also because of them. If they intentionally did something to stop it from happening, because they try at least 3 times, we find out, and on the 3rd time, they're kind of hopeful still. They're still joking around, but the mood does take a bit of a dour turn. Particularly, there's a little bit more sniping at each other, and a particularly emotional scene where he's just kind of wrecking the crib and tearing it apart because they don't need it anymore. And she's like listening to this noise downstairs and crying, and it's all kind of like natural and feels very organic. It feels like real people. I think it's nice that like the moment before she goes on her drive that she apparently had the accident in. Well, at least that's what Mark is told. And the one thing they don't get to in this episode is how he identified the body. Although, again, we have talked about clones in the show theorizing before. Maybe there's something going on with that, or I don't know. Maybe they just put her on a slab and gave her something to look dead. I don't know. But regardless, they have this little awkward interaction where she says, "I love you" on the way out the door, and he sort of ignores it. Not intentionally necessarily, but she doesn't just let him away with it though. She kind of comes back and says, "Hey, I said," and he cuts her off and jumps in and says, "I love you too. I'm sorry." And it's kind of this thing where they're in maybe like a weird place, but there's still like genuine love there. And that little moment's actually something that has like a little spark of recognition, because earlier in the episode, and one of the things Gemma's going through, it felt like the Doctor was intentionally recreating a kind of similar moment for her. Or maybe he wasn't, but like the way she responds felt like it was like a similar moment to this. So yeah, all of this was just a really good way to ground the characters, because as much as it's been interesting, theorizing about Gemma, and notably when I was talking about season 1 back when I watched it, one of the few things I wasn't immediately sure I liked was the reveal that Miss Casey was Mark's dead wife. I wasn't immediately in love with that idea. Now, there's been a lot of cool stuff in theorizing about it over the course of this season, but I think this episode has made me like it more than any other episode, and it is one simple thing. It made me care about her as a human being. It made me care about her as a character. It made me care about the relationship. Because up until that point, it was just, he had a dead wife, and we hadn't met her yet. right? And they intentionally concealed what she looked like, obviously, because we weren't meant to know it was Miss Casey. And she's been this driving plot force throughout the season, and it's worked quite well. And like Mark being willing to do certain things like reintegration has been a big part of this season. But none of that compares to actually getting to see the relationship and care about it and see them go through these ups and downs and want to see them reconcile, because they deserve to reconcile, because they, like, more than ever, like, they were at a stage where they were going through so much that they need to, like, they almost needed to have a reconciliation anyway before she went missing or was presumed dead. But now more than ever, they need to reconcile. They both need that in some form. You know, so, and obviously everything that's happening to her is super cruel, which I guess neatly leads me into what's going on there. Which, yeah, so it does seem like the real Gemma is in there, right? The outie Gemma is, like, there. Doesn't, like, obviously by the end, she wants to try and escape and feels imprisoned. It's a little unclear, like, if she's felt that way the entire time, or if this is just something that she's gotten to. Like, was she convinced to come here of her own free will? Was she kind of kidnapped and lied to about why she's there and why she can't leave? Either way, she is in there, and she does ask about seeing Mark again, so she knows who Mark is, which is, I think, what tells me that it is really her. That it is, you know, it is her original personality, I guess is the better way of saying that. So that's cool. But we see that she, like, has a schedule each day. She's talking to this nurse who's kind of the evil nurse, and there's also the evil doctor, Dr. Mauer. I think that's what I think that's how you pronounce that. I think that's what she said in the episode. But they do this thing where she goes into different rooms and she gets dressed up in different outfits, different hairstyles or wigs to go into these different rooms. And when she walks into the room, the Severance camera, like, zoom thing happens to indicate that she is switched to an innie. But it seems like for every single one of these rooms on this lower floor, right, which the elevator at the end of the dark hallway, this is where it leads to. It seems like every single room here's got a name, and for every single room she goes into down here, she has a different personality. I.e., she has multiple innies. She has several innies. And maybe that's the point of the testing here, is they're testing how far they can push the human brain. And, you know, while all these different personalities begin to bleed together if they make too many, like, what are the limits here? And it also seems to be like an endurance thing where they seem to intentionally be putting each version of her through hell. Like, the first one we see, she goes in and it's a dentist office. And for this woman who's only waking up when she enters this room, she's only ever at the dentist, you know, and it makes that clear in the dialogue where the dentist says, hey, it's been 6 weeks. And she's like, what? I was just here. All this woman ever experiences is being at the dentist. That is nightmarish. That is awful. That's worse than it being at work for all your waking hours. And then likewise, like, one of the other ones is she's at like a Christmas setting, like, family room. The evil scientist doctor is pretending to be the husband, and she's having to write hundreds of thank you notes, which was also something that kind of referenced a real part of her life where she said she hated writing thank you notes. Or Mark pointed out that she didn't like writing thank you notes. And her hands are, like, covered in ink. She's struggling. Her hands are sore. And they keep asking her after these, like, days in these rooms, like, oh, do you feel anything? And she's like, oh, my mouth is sore because she was at the dentist. Or my hands are sore. And she has no idea why. She just knows she goes into these rooms and she comes out and she feels, you know, pain, or at the very least, like, tired in some way because of whatever they've been putting her through in one of those rooms. And at least from the day that we saw some of, she went into 6 different rooms that day. So they're giving, like, her a full schedule. And of course, Cold Harbor is one of the names on one of the rooms. And she points out that she's not seen that name before. That room she's never went into, never had a name. And apparently it's the final room, which does make me curious about what's actually going to happen if it's ever complete. They mentioned that Mark's at 96%. What happens when she goes into the final room? Exactly. You know, they're saying she'll get to go home, or they imply it at the very least at one point. She seems to think that. But I'm not so sure what happens when they're finished. Is Cold Harbor? Why is Cold Harbor the final room? What happens when they're finally done with all of this stuff that's happening? It also makes me wonder if they're testing her with situations that are kind of based somewhat loosely on things from her life. And I'm not sure if they all are necessarily, but at least there's a couple of I mean, the dentist one is just something everyone has to do, I guess. But the one at the Christmas setting definitely felt like it was like hitting on a couple of things that were specific to her. Like, does that mean that like they're getting this information from Mark from the data he's like refining somehow? I mean, I don't know how the numbers would translate to that necessarily, but maybe that's what's happening in there or something. It's having them build like a profile for this to go in. And there's a few different elements here as well beyond just the what are they doing and what is happening here with this system. And that is simply that Dr. Mauer, the creepy doctor, who was the one that was whistling. So it turned out not to be John Noble, because that was my guess back when we saw the hint of who this guy was. Is he seems to be infatuated with Gemma. He seems to, enjoy it. At one point, Drummond even says to him, "Hey, we'll be done soon, and you'll have to give her up." Now, is that because they Lumen intend on letting her free to go back to Mark, or is it because they plan on just killing her to keep all this quiet? These are both options here, and given how sinister all this feels, it wouldn't surprise me if it's the darker of the two options. But he doesn't, it doesn't seem like he wants to give her up. In fact, there's even the moment before she hits him with the chair where when she says, "I want to go home," and there's lots of great little transitions from the flashbacks to where she is now, where it'll be like her sitting in the reception at the clinic, and it'll just snap cut to her in the room she's in, and it's the exact same shape. The couch is in the same place. Or the one that I really liked was like when it was a close-up of her eyes, and it went from like a nice scene to like a really sinister scene. But when she says she wants to go home, the doctor just says, "Oh, your husband remarried a year ago. He's got a kid now." And that felt particularly cruel, saying that he's got a kid now, given that she felt, she went through not being able to conceive a child, and at one point she even said sorry, as if, the implication being that she feels that it's her fault in some level. So him saying that to her is especially cruel, and he knows it's cruel. This is not an accident that he said that. He is trying to make her feel like she doesn't want to go home, that she is helpless, and that she should stay here because here's important or whatever. But yeah, she hits him, and this entire segment where she grabs his key card and she goes on the run, and we're going through all these dark hallways where all these room doors are, and there's these little lights near the bottom of the ceiling, or the ceiling, the wall, right? Down at the floor and the wall. There's these like motion sensor lights that light up as she's running through, which is a really cool visual for one, but it also made it hard for her to sneak when the nurse is going about. So she has to kind of stay still at one point. But it was a really cool visual. And she runs to the elevator, she gets there just in time, but when she gets in the elevator, the Severance zoom happens. She's clearly switched. And I predicted, and I think a lot of people will predict, that she just became Miss Casey. That Miss Casey is one of the personalities that they've put in her, and the door opens and she comes walking out, and she's walking down the hall, and it's confirmed when Milchick runs up to the end of the hallway out of breath. He's there, and he makes up an excuse saying, "Your outie came in for an art show and wandered down the wrong hallway. Just pop back into the elevator and you're fine." So, he's complicit in this business. I mean, we kind of knew he was anyway, but this felt so dark to me, this part of it, that even though she's realized she wants to escape, so she has been kept, against her will. This is straight up just a kidnapping. They're doing evil experiments. But even when she tries to, fight out, when she is able to, get an upper hand and make a run for it, she still can't do anything, because the second she went through that elevator, she became someone else. She is completely and utterly helpless because of what they've done to her. And that is, so dark. They're messing with her mind, and even just so what's something we always talk about on this show. We talk about the idea of the innies and the outies both being valid personalities, and they should both have rights, and it's cruel what they're doing to the innies by making them only ever work. and the ethics of that. Gemma has seemingly dozens of innies, all of whom have even less time and less rights than even the innies at the work do. Like, that is monstrous what they are doing to all of these variant personalities and her. And it, you know, it does make me scared. Like, can she? I mean, not that she has to reintegrate necessarily. Maybe in her case, it's just more of an idea of like, get her out as an outie and just let her live her life, because there's too many innies to deal with. I feel like reintegrating, like, I don't know how many, like 50 personalities, however many she has. But you know, given how difficult it is for one reintegration that Mark's going through, and we saw Petey go through, I don't think that our brain's going to be able to take all of these different personalities, especially since it doesn't seem like a lot of them have the same kind of level of experiences that the innie Mark does or the other innies do when they're at work, you know, consistently every day for 7, 8, 9 hours a day. You know, she like, some of them are just going to the dentist. That's all they experience, and that's it. There's almost nothing of value for that. You know, and it's almost dark to say this, but it's almost like some of these personalities are better off never living again, because their existence is just being one thing, and that one thing is unpleasant, and it feels like they're all unpleasant. So all of this, I felt was super dark. Like, I think this episode did a couple of really important things for the show. It made Lumen, even though they've always been imposing, there's always been kind of a villainous kind of vibe to them, I think this episode makes you hate Lumen. This episode makes you hate what they're doing and just how monstrous it actually is. And I think it makes you want to save Gemma. I think up until now, the motivation of like, hey, you know, I want to get my wife back, I want to get Gemma, it's worked as a character motivation for Mark. I think after this episode, the audience cares about Gemma in a way that I don't think we could until this episode. Because now she's a person, now we care about her, now we understand that she has been held against her will, that she even wants to go back to Mark, she wants to see Mark. Like, she wants that, and it's been denied of her. And then you get into the messy business of thinking about, well, how do we square up the whole Helly romance with the innie Mark, especially since he's reintegrating. It's not like they're going to be separate people for much longer, forever. So how does that happen? How does that work? And how do we deal with that? Because that's the one part of what the doctor said. Oh, Mark remarried. Well, he's not remarried, but part of Mark has moved on. Not all of them, but part of them has. It's honestly, this was wonderful. It was obviously a very kind of a trippy episode because it was jumping between the flashbacks and then this stuff with Gemma, and then a little bit of like Devon in that looking after Mark and debating what to do there. Like it had a very dreamlike flow to it, the way it was like jumping between things, and that made it very compelling and very emotional when it needed to be emotional, and ultimately succeeded in making us care about her as a person. She's not just a plot mechanic anymore. She's not just a MacGuffin anymore, right? Because that's kind of what she was to an extent, is that she was the MacGuffin to go save. Now she's a character we care about. And this is why you cast her. And you know what's so funny about this, actually? Is John Noble was cast in this show, right? And I was joking a little bit about how, I love John Noble from Fringe, mainly. I love that show. And part of that show deals with alternate realities. And I don't know if I made this joke on the review or I made it on the first take of the review that I mostly had to redo because the stupid tech thing where my mic wasn't being picked up. But I made a joke that if Fields has an innie, I'm going to call him alternate. And I think it's interesting that there's like that it kind of almost harkens back to his time on Fringe doing Mad Science and this idea of there being two versions of him. It's kind of interesting. It might even be an intentional thing they did with casting. The weird thing about this stuff with Gemma is that it's actually kind of connecting to something else that the actress has been in. So Lachman was in Dollhouse, which was a 2-season show by Joss Whedon, and I know we don't really like to talk about him that much anymore, but it was a really interesting show about basically these women who were turned, well, not just women, it was women and men who were turned into blank slates, aka dolls, and then different personalities would be put into them for jobs where they'd be hired out. Now, sometimes it was just straight up prostitution, where someone would, hey, I want a doll but I want her to be this, and instead of the doll just pretending that she's, like, say, an assassin, they would actually put the personality of an assassin into the doll. But this idea that they were messing with her mind, and there's this blank slate, and then eventually the real person kind of forms out of it, that was a big part of that show, without spoiling too much. And I think it's really interesting that she somehow found herself in a role where she's got all these different personalities in her head, and we're kind of rooting for her to sort of, like, become free and be the real her again. I think that is a fascinating little thing. I doubt it was intentional necessarily, because it's not like Dollhouse left a huge mark on the world, although I liked it a lot. I mean, it started off quite shaky, don't get me wrong. It was a pretty rough, like, half of a season, but showed some great heights throughout the rest of it. So this is a weird kind of coincidence there. Something that I've not mentioned yet is there's a couple of fancy transitions in this episode, and one of them takes us to the monitoring room, where there's 4 people, seemingly one for each member of MDR, and although none of those 4 anymore, but there was 4, right? And notably, the 4 of them all look kind of like the person they're monitoring, right? I couldn't help but notice as the camera was coming down later on when we see them, that one looks a little like Dylan, and one's like an older man like Irving. Like, it kind of felt like that, you know, it's not that they're identical, but it felt like they all had like a bit of a counterpart quality to whoever they were monitoring. And we mainly focus on the one who's monitoring Mark and talking about his progress in Cold Harbor and whatnot. And I do worry that if Cold Harbor gets finished, that it might actually be bad for Gemma, which gives us like another sort of ticking time clock element to the show. And we're only 3 episodes left in the season now, so we, you know, we're getting to some sort of probably not the ending of the show, but some sort of resolution to what we're currently doing. But yeah, I couldn't help but notice that. It makes me wonder if these counterparts were, I know some people said they might have just been animatronics, but remember on the mountains they had like sort of like the duplicates who were pointing. I wonder if like these people were sort of doing that, were the ones that were sort of dressed up as them, maybe. I don't know, just a thought, because it's not the first time the idea of a duplicate has come up. But anyway, so that's super interesting as well. And I love the stuff with Devon. As much as it's, you know, it's probably the most straightforward and simple part of the episode, Devon like throwing, you know, like her weight down in a good way with Rigabi and saying, hey, his brain is now under my decision making, so hey, help him. Maybe I'll phone Cobell. Maybe she knows what to do. You know, she got fired or whatever. Maybe she'll be willing to help us. And she doesn't end up calling her, right? And Rigabi makes it clear that she'll just run away if she does, because it's a bad idea as far as she's concerned. But you know, there's a lot of talking about like when Mark's going to wake up, and it is a really sweet moment at the end when he wakes up and she's happy that he's awake. She's relieved, and he sort of sits up and she says, "Where were you?" And he just kind of like gives this little look, and we know that he's been thinking about Gemma. And for the first time in the show, because of everything we've just seen throughout this story, both the flashbacks and seeing the predicament she's in, and realizing that we want to save her as well, this is the first time where, and it's done without a word as well, which is great. He doesn't say anything. He just gives a look, and it cuts to the credits. It's a beautiful little moment to end on. But it's the first time when he is reacting to the memory of Gemma, where we, the audience, get to feel it with him. And because of that, it's the most impactful it's ever been, right? Whenever he's went quiet before and he's sad about his dead wife, or whenever he's reacted to something, like I say, it became compelling in a mysterious way, because obviously it added on some levels of, oh, she's alive, why is she alive, what are they doing to her? He wants to pursue this and find out what's going on. Like, it got interesting in a lot of ways before already, but this was like emotionally investing. Like, I think when he reacted here at the end of the episode, I felt a pang of emotion. I felt something for it. It felt like he's been thinking about his wife, and it feels like no, that he does truly love her, and we are now invested in that love, which is very well done. And I think it's something that did need to happen at some point to really care about like saving her and getting to her. And I think now more than ever, we are invested in that. We're invested in getting to her. And it's arguably the right time in the season as well. I think, we're getting into the final 3 episodes, so you could argue that if we're splitting the season into 3 acts, we're getting into the final act of the season in that sense. And it's the right time to up the stakes and how much we care. So the villain feeling more villainous, the reason to be a hero feeling more potent than ever, it just makes everything feel better. It makes everything feel more dramatic. It makes everything feel more edgier seat. And that's a really cliche phrase to use, but I think I mean it in this case, where it feels like I care about everything in a way that before I was enjoying the themes, I was enjoying the way we'd talk about the innies and the outies and talking about the mechanics of it, and I was enjoying the shooting style and there was like, it sounds like I'm saying that this made me love the show and I didn't before. I did love the show before. I loved it for many reasons. I think this episode slotted in the one missing piece. That's what this felt like. It felt like it slotted in the one missing piece, which was the outright emotional investment, particularly in the outies. I think the emotional investment was there for the innies for the most part, because I cared about Innie, Mark, and Helly. I cared about Arvin and Dylan, and we spend so much time with those versions of the characters. But I think this made me care about the larger context of the show outside of the innies, and just about how their lives are going to go. So on that front, I think this was a rousing success and gave us a new specific villain to hate in the Doctor, but even just the idea of Lumen as a whole and the mystery of what they're actually doing with this. What is the purpose of this? They say it's important. They say that Cold Harbor is good for the world, but that also makes it sound like it's going to be a sacrifice. So excited. Or is it a case of no, like Gemma will just be done, but this evil Doctor will want to keep her for himself because he's a sicko? I mean, that was definitely some of the vibes I was getting. So no, yeah, and it's just this idea as well, and the Severance like concept in general. This idea, like how you could like torture someone, right? Like imagine a scenario where like a company like Lumen just have people who are prisoners, right? But they have them severed. So what they do is they send them through the door, they unsever, or they go to their innie, and the innie thinks that they've got a nice outside life, right? The innie thinks that the outside world, that they've got a comfortable life, they've maybe got a family, whatever. It's all kind of open for them to assume, hey, life on the outside's pretty good, so I'll be good at work. But in reality, when they walk back out the door, they're just immediately put into chains and they're treated like shit. But the innie never knows that. The innie never knows that they're just a prisoner. They're just a slave to a company. Is that like part of the angle to this? Don't know. But fascinating to think about anyway. So this was a winner, for sure. There's a legitimate argument that it is the best episode of the show. And the only reason why it might not win that for some people is just because it's so different to what the show typically is, that maybe you love it as a separate kind of episode, but your favorite's the best example of what a normal episode is, if that makes any sense. But as far as being emotionally invested goes, this has to be the top of the list, I think. So let me know what you thought of this episode of Severance in the comments. Point out anything that I glossed over that you'd like to discuss down there. Yeah, fascinating stuff. And obviously I missed some of the other characters a little bit, but this was a long time overdue. Like we've been waiting for Gemma for so long to actually get to meet her, because this is the first time we ever get to really meet Gemma. We never got to meet her. We met Miss Casey. We met an innie. We met one of several innies, but we didn't meet her. So right at the start of the episode, just getting to meet her, realizing this is when she met Mark, and getting to see what her story is and who she is, but also realizing that we're actually looking at who she really is right now inside the system. So, phenomenal. Let me know what you think in the comments, like, subscribe, all that stuff, and of course you can support all the content over at Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Yada yada yada. Check out the movie channel, MailFuzz Movies, for all the movie podcasts. But that is me. Thank you very much for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?